Arvind points out in that letter that IBM has supported many presidents in times of crisis and profound change, and we're facing both right now. What do you think should be on the top of Joe Biden's list of priorities?
Well, first of all, thank you, Emily, for having me on the show. And indeed, throughout our history over a century, in times of great change and great crisis, IBM has always been involved. I mean, at the time of FDR and the creation of the Social Security Administration, or with Kennedy and the Apollo program. And now we confront the challenge, of course, of public health and the pandemic, but also the challenge of climate change and a number of other existential challenges. And the unique opportunity that we have is to come together as a nation and to use science as a mechanism to address some of these pressing problems. And the good news is that because we're witnessing a revolution in the world of computing, we're going to be able to supercharge the scientific discovery process and tackle some of these challenges.
Now, when Arvind calls for precision regulation, what exactly does that mean? We know there's certainly a lot of scrutiny, big scrutiny, facing big tech companies. What's IBM's position on that?
Well, what it means is that, commensurate with the power of some of these science and technology advances, AI is a good example, but we could name other areas like quantum computing and beyond, there is going to be a responsibility that we all co-share in the developers and creator of these technologies, the role of Congress and legislation has, and the administration will have, in to be able to provide a proper governance around it. Because, as the technologies, we've seen it as an example, to give an example in facial recognition, and the discussions and the debate that we've engaged as society in that topic. And you saw the decision that we made as a company to not, sell commercially facial recognition technology at this point, absent the proper regulatory framework for it. So it's a good example of self-governance, but we gotta all be part of this management process of the power of technology.
Now, you've called on the administration to establish a scientific readiness reserve, which would include scientists and various computing resources that could be deployed from the private sector to deal with crises. So not just a pandemic, but crises like a drought, an asteroid over a city, a super deadly volcano eruption, a tsunami, nuclear power plants exploding. Walk us through some of the scenarios and how something like this would help.
Yeah, first, let me share the inspiration for this. In times of great crisis, we've also seen institutional innovation and creativity around that. And here's a basic fact. The talent, the scientific and technological talent of the nation is distributed, right? In the United States, we spend about $600 billion in R&D. 70% of that spend is in the private sector. So when we're dealing with a grand challenge like a pandemic, or in this case, an earthquake, if we were discussing different scenarios, you can imagine tapping into the expertise and the resources that is distributed across institutions. But how do you do that? That's the inspiration for example, in the military. In the military, there is the notion of a reserve. And while people could be, in day-to-day in their civilian environment, at a time of crisis, you can call upon the reserve who has received training, and there's a mechanism to work together to augment the active duty troops. So imagine the same for the science and technology talent of the nation, where when it's needed, we can come together and there's a coordination mechanism that is in place for all of us to work together. And we've learned that lesson these last number of months in the creation, for example, of the COVID-19 high-performance computing consortia, where public sector and private sector came together, and we've aggregated the biggest consortia in the history of public-private partnership for supercomputing. So why couldn't we do this more broadly for a broad range of science and technology capability to address crises when society needs us?
Now, you run all of IBM's global labs that house your quantum computing systems, and there's definitely been a view from Silicon Valley that sometimes the people at the top of our government just don't understand how powerful technology could be, and also the potential dangers of it. What does the new or next administration need to understand about that power, how it can be used for good and potentially bad?
Well, I think we need to elevate science thinking at all levels of decision making. And we know that scientific and technological advances are going to be at the core of our competitive advantage, at the core of also our well-being, and some of the grand challenges that we need to solve. So what I would ask is that this is a moment for all of us to come together and rekindle and redouble our commitment to research and development and science and technology, and that we put it to use at the highest priorities of our society. So not just digital for digital, but the use of these advances to improve our manufacturing, to accelerate the rate of discovery, to provide more opportunity for all and not to be so heavily concentrated just on the coast, and to continue to invest in education at all levels. I am a passionate believer that through science and technology advances, with the proper governance and the proper commitment to meet societal goals, we really can deliver on the promise of what our society needs in the next decade.